con nosotros el doctor Olajide Bamishigbin y va a conversar con nosotros sobre el tema de la resiliencia y los trastornos de ansiedad. En todo caso, voy a iniciar la presentación para que todos conozcamos muy bien al doctor Gide. I want to greet Dr. Olajide Bamishigbin, Gide for the friends, and warmly welcome him to these webinars that we started last week jointly, organized by the State University of California, Long Beach, and the Bolivian Catholic University here at it's a pleasure to meet you personally, and it is an honor to have you as part of this project. Now, I'm going to introduce Dr. Bamishigbin, and I will do it in Spanish. El doctor Olajide Bamishigbin es profesor asistente de Psicología e investigador principal del Laboratorio de Familia, Resiliencia y Salud en la Universidad Estatal de California, Long Beach. El doctor Bamishigbin recibió su doctorado en Psicología de la Salud en la Universidad de California en Los Ángeles en 2017 y tiene otros estudios de licenciatura en Psicología en la Universidad de Miami, que hace su investigación esta noche. Su trabajo de investigación se ha centrado básicamente en temas relacionados con estrés, con resiliencia y la depresión en poblaciones de padres de familia. Hoy la conferencia de Gide se llama Riesgo, Resiliencia y Síntomas Depresivos en varias muestras. Okay, we are ready to start. Please, Dr. Gide, you have
Wonderful.
the word.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. Can everybody hear me well? I just want to double check. Great.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm very excited to be here. My name is Dr. Olajide Bamishigbin, and I'm really excited to be here to talk with you about my research on fathers. Okay, so risk, resilience, and depressive symptoms in fathers. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'll just give you a little background. I'll tell you about the theoretical framework I use that guides this project. And I'll talk about some different research projects. One of them is focused on risk and resilience in low-income dads, and the other one is focused on early father involvement in an ethnically diverse sample of fathers. And then we'll talk about some of the current research projects that I'm working on. So I'm really excited to be here once again. So fathers, okay? So just in general, and I guess this is really one of the guiding things that guides my research, is I believe that fathers are important members of the family unit, right? If we're thinking of the traditional family, with two parents and a child, the dads are important parts, this is me when I was a kid with my own dad, right? And here I am with my own two sons, so dad, personally, I feel like dads are important, but also there's a lot of research that shows that dads are important. Okay, so we know that when we are looking at children, we care about children's health, children's mental health, children's behavior, children's emotional regulation, all these things. And we know that different factors from fathers, like whether the father is present or not, right? Whether the father is involved or not, how the father parents and what type of parenting style this father has, the father's mental health, and the health behaviors that the father takes up, like exercising, smoking, drinking alcohol. Those all affect the children and the whole family. We know that. Okay, so that's really important. So dads are just very important. However, the question is, what predicts these in fathers, right? We know that these, that father absence, father involvement, father mental health impact kids, but what impacts a father's mental health? What impacts a father's parenting behaviors? What impacts a father's health behaviors, right? That is the question that I am interested in, because historically, research on families, right, in the area of family psychology has excluded fathers. It's mostly focused on children and mothers, and fathers haven't been included. And this is especially true for Black and Latino dads, as well as fathers who have low income, right? So my research aims to investigate predictors of poor mental health in low-income Black and Latino fathers, as well as to explore racial ethnic disparities in risk, resilience, and health. Okay. Are there any questions so far before I go ahead and get started? But this is just like my general research aim.
Okay, everything's okay. Please
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. So in general, I use a risk and resilience framework for studying fathers. And a risk and resilience framework simply just says that there are risk factors that are related to an outcome, in this case, depressive symptoms. And there are resilience resources that also may be related to an outcome directly, or the resilience resources maybe interact with the risk factors to produce the outcomes that we care about, right? So this is generally the framework that I'm interested in. And now I'm going to get into some different types of risk factors and resilience resources that I study. So the risk factor that I care most about is chronic stress. Okay. And chronic stress is persistent negative exposure or experience of threat or excessive demand. Okay. So it's persistent. So that's the thing about chronic stress. It's ongoing, right? It keeps on going. And you feel threatened and there's too many demands on you. And different examples include experiencing discrimination, period, or experiencing problems at work. You can also be in a chronically stressful environment, right? So there are environments that are chronically stressful. For example, living in poverty is chronically stressful. It's always tough knowing when you're going to eat. It's tough knowing when you get sick. Do I have to go to the hospital? Can I afford the hospital? All these different things. So that's a stressful context. And then parenting is also a stressful context, right? Like I've said before, I have two kids, and when you're a parent, you have like 30 different jobs, right? You're a chauffeur, you're a counselor, you're a cook, you're a financial planner, you're a housekeeper, everything. Okay. So just how is parenting chronically stressful, right? I just said that, but let's talk. Okay. One, your sleep is going to be affected, right? So after you have a kid, and I'm sure there are people here who have kids, particularly babies, that first year, that sleep, you're not going to sleep that much, right? And that's stressful. Sleep is really important for our health and our mental health. Okay. So sleeping impacts you. Having a baby impacts your relationship quality. So there's a lot of research showing that after you have a child, the relationship between a mother and a father changes, usually negatively. Okay. There's lots of arguments about things related to the baby, XYZ. So that happens as well. Kids are expensive. Right now, kids are expensive. I was just saying the other day, my mom was calling me and was like, if you have another baby, I'll get you a car. I'm like, I would like a car, but children are expensive. Are you going to help me pay off the rest of the baby for the rest of his life? I don't know. So kids are expensive. And another thing is that kids can go from this, right? So this is my older one. He's 6 now, and this is my 3-year-old. They can go from this to this in a second. Right, back to this, to back to this, to back to this, to back to this, and that is really, and that can be really stressful, right? And particularly given that we've been living through this pandemic with COVID-19. A lot of us are at home, and we're trying to get work, and our kids are over here. I need this, I need that. That can be stressful. Okay, so I just want to point out that these things, parenting can be stressful for everybody, even if you don't have a necessarily difficult child. Just parenting can be stressful. And chronic stress. A lot of research has shown that it's related to more depression, as well as smoking, drug and alcohol use, dying earlier, more heart problems, and greater allostatic load, which is the physiological cost of wear and tear in your body. So chronic stress is bad. Resilience, the other thing that I told you about in the theoretical framework, is when you bounce back after a major stressful or traumatic event. Okay, and resilience is really, really important, okay, because in our lives, we're all going to experience stress. We're all going to experience traumatic things. Things are going to happen in our lives, but everybody doesn't get knocked down the same way. Some people are able to get back up, and that is thought to be resilience. And resilience resources are the how. So resilience is that you did come back. Resilience resources are how you came back, after this stressful event. So you're in a relationship and it breaks up and you're really sad, right? And then you talk to your friends and, they help you get through it. And then you're happy again, right? Because you're over it, forget that guy. I don't need him, right? So this person here is resilient because she bounced back after a major stressful event, okay? The resilience resource she used, the thing that helped her bounce back, is the social support from her friends. Okay, so I'm interested in those kinds of things that help make us resilient, like social support. So here's different types of resilience resources. We don't have to talk about these right now, but if anybody has questions, I'm happy to tell you about different types. So here's our theoretical framework. Once again, we're looking at risk factors for depressive symptoms and resilience resources that are related to depressive symptoms and may protect from the risk factors, specifically in fathers. Okay, so this study that I'm going to be telling you about, these two studies, come from the Community Child Health Network, also known as CCHN. This study was dedicated to understanding disparities in low-income minority groups through community participatory research. There are many racial ethnic health disparities in the United States, particularly related to infant mortality, preterm birth, and maternal mortality. Black women are far more likely to die. Hispanic women, depending on their country of origin, are also more likely to die. So this study really wanted to understand these things. We worked together with community members through all stages of research, and we recruited families all over the United States. Okay. So in this study, mothers were recruited in the hospital. Fathers were only contacted after the mothers agreed, and parents were interviewed in their homes 5 times after the birth of the child: 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and 24 months. Both of the studies I'm telling you about will be using data from the 1 month and 12 months study. Okay. So here's the first study, risk, resilience, and depressive symptoms in low-income Black fathers. This has been published already. This is my first study. I love this study. I think it's really important. So once again, we use data from CCHN. We looked at fathers from 1 month and 12 months. Okay. So the dads, we had 306. In this study, we only cared about the Black dads. So 306 Black fathers, on average 28 years old. The median income was about $8,000, which is not that high at all. Most of the fathers lived below the federal poverty line. About a quarter had less than a high school degree, and about 40% were unemployed. Okay, so this is a really disadvantaged sample of fathers, low income, not highly educated, and about almost half of the sample unemployed, right? So this is a really disadvantaged sample. So that's why I care about them. And for risk factors for depression, we looked at several different things. We looked at perceived stress. We looked at experiences of racism. We looked at negative life events, such as did you go through a divorce this year? Did you have a friend who died? We looked at avoidant coping styles, so the way that people cope with, stressors. Do you address the stressors or do you withdraw and avoid them? And socioeconomic status. So we looked at specifically education and income in our models. For resilience, we looked at social support, which is how much support you feel like you receive from your family, friends, significant others. Self-esteem, which is generally how good you feel about yourself. Collective efficacy, which is about how strongly and cohesive you feel like your community is. And approach-oriented coping style. So while avoidant coping is about withdrawing from a stressor, denying a stressor, approach-oriented coping is about solving a stressor or dealing with it. And our outcome that we cared about was depressive symptoms in fathers. And particularly, we were looking at these risk factors and resilience resources shortly after the birth of the child, predicting changes in depressive symptoms after the birth of the child. So Which factors predict an increase in depressive symptoms over time? What predicts a decline in depressive symptoms over time? And are any resiliency sources protect against the effects of stress on depressive symptoms? So this last third hypothesis, I'm really just looking for an interaction between the risk factors and resilience resources. So let's get into it. First question. We don't have to show this. First question, which risk factors predicted an increase in depressive symptoms over time? So what we did was in this model, first we entered depressive symptoms because the strongest predictor of later depression is previous depression. So we control for prior depression. Then we entered things like their relationship status, whether they're a first-time father. And then we entered all the risk factors. And what we found was that out of all the risk factors, the significant predictors of depression were avoidant coping and frequency of racism, okay? So fathers who said that they use more avoidant coping, such as maybe substance abuse to deal with problems, denying a problem, and fathers who said that they experienced more racism. So like somebody followed me around in a store, I was treated less politely than other people, they reported more depression a year after the birth of the child. Okay. And this is just the parsimonious model of that. So avoidant coping and experiencing more racism for Black fathers really impacted their mental health, as we saw here. So yes, we did find this. Our next question, what resilience resources predict a decline in depressive symptoms over time? So the same thing, first we entered depressive symptoms at time 1, then we entered the different covariates such as where they're from, relationship satisfaction, and then we entered all the resilience resources. And we found that none of them predicted depression, okay? So none of these factors over and above anything else will, predict your depression or show a decline in depressive symptoms. That's really interesting. None of them. So we didn't find any. And then we also tested the interaction hypotheses, the moderation hypotheses, and we also didn't find any, right? So this study, we had multiple time points, which is a strength. We used different types of risk and resilience, and we had a large sample of low-income dads who typically aren't looked at in research studies, in the field of psychology. However, the avoidant coping was only measured at T3. And, these are dads who agreed to participate in the study. So they might not be like every dad, right? They might not be representative of fathers in general. Okay, these are just dads who agreed to be in a study about parenting. So they might be dads who are good parents. Theoretically, we don't know, but this is just a guess. Okay, so the implications of these findings are that, one, resilience resources might not be effective for poor Black men. Right. So these are men who, once again, I really want to stress that they're really disadvantaged fathers with regards to low income, low levels of education, and those factors really impact our entire lives in this country. And it seems like the resilience resources like social support, they don't matter. They're not going to save you in this context. And that's important. So that means we may need larger structural changes to improve the lives of Black men and Black fathers in the United States. 2, once again, we found that racism is bad for your health, right? And in the United States, unfortunately, lots of times racism is a part of life for lots of people who look like me and other racial ethnic minorities, and it's just bad for your health. This study just, once again, another study to show that. So it's really important that we find ways to combat that because that impacts our mental health as well. And more research is needed on fathers, just generally, from diverse backgrounds. I think it's really important to understand what predicts these factors in fathers from different backgrounds, right? So racism is a stressor in the United States that Black people experience the most in comparison to other racial ethnic groups. Like statistically, research has shown that Black people report the most frequent experiences of racism. But what are other stressors that might impact fathers from other backgrounds, right? So perhaps, how does the model minority myth impact Asian fathers, right? How does acculturative stress, right? Or how does acculturation and immigration status impact Latino fathers in the United States? These are also very interesting questions that I think we need to question. Okay. And that's study 1. Okay. So here's study 2. And then I guess we'll do questions after. Here's study 2, which is about early father involvement in depression in ethnically diverse fathers. And this has also been published already. This study actually got a lot of press. It got featured on the Today Show with Al Roker, and he talked about it, and it was on CNN. You know, it's got a lot of press. It's a really people found this interesting, so I'm happy to share this with you. So, paternal involvement. Okay, so when we think of paternal involvement, things have changed, right? So if I asked you 30 years ago what paternal involvement is, your answer would be different than what it is now. All right. So historically, paternal involvement, like I said earlier, dads weren't really involved in studies at all, right? And if they were, the only question they asked was, does dad live in the house or not? Right? Like, are you a single mother or not? And that was considered a proxy for involvement, which to some extent it is, but it shrouds a lot of mystery, right? You can be a dad who doesn't live with his kids, but you come see him every day, right? You come hang out with him every weekend, right? Versus you can be a dad who lives in a house with your wife and kids, and you're not a good parent. You're not around. You maybe perhaps you're abusive, right? So these are all kind of it's important to have more specific understandings of what father involvement is. Okay, so this is what we try to do in this study. We looked at father involvement as a multidimensional construct, right? So father involvement has a lot of things. In particular, there's three things we cared about in this study, how we looked at father involvement. One was accessibility, okay? So this is, once again, is the father accessible or not? Does the father spend time with the child or not? Right? Yes or no? Um, and next is engagement. And engagement is the quality of that time, right? So, okay, a father, yes, is spending time with his kids. How is he doing that? How warm is he? Right? How good a father is he? Right? What are the things he's doing? And then there's responsibility, which is about, you know, how responsible is a father for tasks around the house without mom having to ask, right? So like, is father able to make doctor's appointments, right? Without having to ask mom? Is father able to, you know, take the kids out places and do these things and just take responsibility as a father? So these are the constructs and how we thought about it today. And I'll tell you more about the study. Okay. And paternal involvement is good for kids generally. I've already said this, but it's associated with lower rates of infant mortality, more positive relationships between the father and the baby, less maternal depression, and moms feel happier. Okay. So paternal involvement is good, okay, for the family, just in general. The way a father interacts with his kids and wife and family is important. And I've said that before, but I just want to stress that, you know, if you take anything away from us this today, just know that dads are important. I believe that in your life, your dad has probably been important too. Okay. So this question is early involvement with an infant associated with better mental health among fathers. Okay. So usually we find that fathers who have better mental health are more involved. Okay. But rarely do we ask the other question. Are fathers who are involved, are they going to have better mental health later on? Right. And that's specifically the question we asked here. Okay. So once again, we use data from CCHN. We looked at fathers from the 1 month to the 12-month period, known as the postpartum period. That's the area that I'm particularly interested in. Okay, so dads, in this sample, we used 881 dads. About half were Black, 27% Latino, 27% white. About a quarter born outside of the United States, although mostly that's the Latino fathers. On average, they were about 29 years old. 44% were married and cohabiting with the baby's mother, and 85% live with the infant. Okay, so that's just a little bit about this sample. It's still from the CCHN study. It's just a larger group. So in this study, we looked at father involvement in 3 different ways. We looked at time spent with the infant. So they were asked 4 questions. Did you spend time with your baby during the week? Did you spend alone time with your baby during the week? Did you spend time with your baby during the weekend? Did you spend alone time with your baby during the weekend? Right. So fathers can have a maximum score of 4 on this, which indicates that they spent time with the kids every day and alone time with the kids every day. We asked them questions about, and that's accessibility. So how accessible is the father to you, right? Because that's an important part of involvement. A dad has to be available to be involved. Next is parenting self-efficacy, and that's just how well a father believes he's fathering, right? So how it's like parenting self-esteem kind of, right? So I feel good about my parenting. I feel confident in changing diapers, making bottles, doing things like that. And that's a form of engagement, although it's the father's assessment, perception of his own engagement. And then there's material support provided for the baby. So we ask fathers about, do you buy clothes for your baby? Do you buy milk for your baby? Do you send money? Do you buy toys? Things like that. And that's considered the material support. And once again, we looked at depressive symptoms assessed at both the 1 month time period and a year after the birth of a child. Okay. So for each question, is more time spent with an infant a predictor of less depressive symptoms? So that was one of our questions. So is more accessibility a predictor of less depression? So here I want to orient you to this. Here we looked at fathers who spent all four time periods with their kids, all fathers who spent 3 time periods with their kids, or fathers who spent 2 or less. And in essence, we found that fathers who spend more time with their kids, are less depressed, okay, in general. So here, for fathers who spend 4 days in comparison to the 2 days, you see it's significant. 3 days, it's marginally significant, right? So when dads spend time with their kids, 1 month after the birth of their kid, they're less depressed a year later, okay? Is parenting self-efficacy a predictor of less depressive symptoms? Once again, yes. We find that fathers who reported that they feel greater parenting self-efficacy, they feel stronger at doing things like changing diapers, right? Changing diapers, fixing bottles, playing with the baby, they reported less depressive symptoms later on. Okay. And when fathers provide material support, are they less depressed? Once again, the answer is yes. Okay. Fathers who provided more support for the baby reported less depressive symptoms later on. Okay. So yes, in general, is early involvement with an infant associated with better mental health among fathers? Yes. When you spend time with your kid, you're less depressed. When you feel strong, when you feel better about your parenting, you're less depressed. When you provide more for your baby, you are less depressed. Okay. And I'm sorry I didn't mention this, but all of these findings are controlling for race, income, where they're from in the United States, their employment, their education, whether they're married or not, whether they have other children. Like, we threw the whole model in there, and still, regardless, it's still significant. Okay. So when dads are involved with their kids, they do better. Simple as that. Simple as that. So what are the implications of these findings? Okay. One, and this is specific to the parenting self-efficacy, oftentimes dads don't feel included, right? That part of the reason dads may not be quite as involved is because there's not incentive for them to be involved. The environments are not welcoming enough for them to be involved. Okay. So it's important for dads to be able to have a space to build their skills as dads, particularly for first-time dads. Right. So maybe in doctor's offices checkups, there could be a space for dads to learn about different things related to the kid. Right. And that will help the dad feel better. And in essence, also help the baby feel better. That's one thing. Two, we find that material support provided was linked to better mental health. So we think that this shows that, dads oftentimes feel like their role in the family is to provide and protect for their kids. And their partners, right? And that's an important role. So this shows that maybe they do feel that, and that protects their mental health. So allowing fathers the opportunity to provide and protect their family, once again, may be important. And fathers benefit when they spend time with their infants. Okay, fathers benefit, moms benefit, and the kids benefit. So we have to have the space to allow that to happen for these families, right? So, in the United States, depending on where you live, you have paternity leave or not. Depending on where you live and depending on where you work, you have paternity leave or not. And in places where there's no paternity leave, your baby's born and a week later you have to go back to work, while mom maybe does get maternity leave, sorry, and she's able to stay home and take care of the baby and develop those parenting skills while dad is not, right? Having paternity leave would allow dads to develop that as well, right? So that's just one of those barriers to involvement that I think in general we can remove. Okay. However, there are limitations of this study, as always. I wish we had better measures of involvement. I didn't actually choose these measures, but I wish we had something that assessed how a dad parents with his kids directly. We didn't control for maternal things like maternal depression or maternal, parenting. Although we know those things are important, we really wanted to focus on the dads themselves. And finally, although we found that greater involvement was related to less depressive symptoms, even after controlling for depressive symptoms, it's very possible that those dads who were involved at 1 month were less depressed to begin with. Right. And unfortunately, we were unable to assess that, but that would be something that may play a role as well. Okay. Um, so those are my studies, and I'll tell you about some of my current research. This is a study I did on adolescent fathers. So teen dads I also view as important, and I wanted to understand who are the boys that become teen fathers, right? And how does it affect their lives later on? I'm happy to answer any questions about that if you want. Um, I've completed this study on spirituality and depression and cancer survivors. Although I study fathers now, I originally studied cancer survivors. That was my original area, and that's what I wanted to study on. So I did this study, and we looked at spirituality and depression in cancer survivors. Sorry. We looked at spirituality and depression in cancer survivors, and we found that people who were more spiritual and religious 1 year after diagnosis were less depressed 9 years after diagnosis, right? So spirituality is also something that's very important for individuals with cancer. It's a resilience resource that helps people cope with cancer. We also found differences in depression symptoms by race and mediators. I'm happy to talk about that a little more if you want. And here's some other projects that I'm currently working on with students, looking at college students who have kids and ghosting in relationships, as my own self as a college student with kids, I remember. But here I just want to thank all of my collaborators and my family. So thank you very much for having me.
Okay, thank you very much, Hide. It was very, very interesting. Eh, your research is, I think it is interesting because historically, involvement of mothers was more investigated, no, than fathers' involvement.
Right.
So it is clear that the father's behavior toward children is as important as mother's behavior toward children.
Exactly.
And that thing, for that reasons, I think it is very interesting and very innovative, your research. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bueno, voy a sugerir al auditorio que si tienen algunas preguntas, por favor, pueden hacerlas a través del chat. Vamos a intentar traducir si vienen en español, ojalá vinieran en inglés directamente, pero estamos listos para recibir sus preguntas. I have some questions for you.
Please.
It is clear that resilience is attenuating variable for stress.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition to resilience, are there, according to your experience, other variables that can have similar moderating or mediating effects on alterated affective states?
Yes, that's a great question. Absolutely. So like I said, like you pointed out, I focus on resilience resources, but absolutely many other factors can play interactional roles, moderating roles, attenuating roles. One thing that people look at a lot is socioeconomic status, so things like income, right? So depending on how much income you have, that determines how you might respond to a particular stressor, right? um Depending, even stress itself can be a moderator, depending on specifically what you're looking at, right? um so if we're interested in, for example, cancer, cancer as an outcome, lung cancer, Let's say we're interested in lung cancer as an outcome. We know that smoking predicts lung cancer. That's a verifiable fact. If you smoke, you're more likely to get lung cancer. However, how you respond to that lung cancer depends on many different factors, right? How early did you catch the lung cancer? What type of treatment did you have for the lung cancer? How good is your doctor, right? All these different things also can attenuate the relationship between the factors that we're interested in.
Yeah. Okay. Um, have you recently worked with cases of depressions due to isolation during COVID in older adults?
Uh, Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, because I ask you that because we are very interested in what is happening now with COVID and the relationship between COVID conditions and the mental health of persons, especially the adult population, the, the more the older population. Do you have some experience in this context?
So while I don't have experience in looking in the context for older folks, I did recently get a paper accepted looking at how COVID impacts parenting for among fathers. But there is research generally showing that um, there is research actually surprisingly that older people did better during this COVID-19 pandemic, at least mental health wise, better than younger people. Surprisingly, I can send that along. I'll send that along to Guido to pass along. But surprisingly, older people did better than younger people mentally. Not obviously not physically.
Okay, okay, okay. How does influences depression in older people? Do you think it's those are situations could be considered risk factors for
Oh yes,
depression?
absolutely. There's a wealth of research showing that loneliness is a problem for older people. Because as you get older, a lot of your friends die, and that impacts their mental health. So it's definitely a risk factor for poor health, right? Because we're human beings, we're social people, right? We connect with other people, we care about other people. That's how we like go far, is with other people. So um yeah, that loneliness is bad, and uncertainty is one of the hallmarks of what makes something stressful, right? So the ambiguity of a situation, the uncertainty of a situation, those are things that make people very, very stressed, and that absolutely impacts older folks. Yes. And I see Valentina sent a question in the chat, so I want to make sure I answer it. To do research with the sons of parents to know how the effects of mental health of parents impact the children. Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great research study, and lots of people have done research like that. That's not my area because I care particularly more about the fathers, but many people have shown that your parents are some of the most important people you'll have in your life. Right? The your mom and your dad are some of the most important people you have in your life, and they will impact you, right? And they set the stage for the rest of your life. So absolutely, put the parental mental health impacts, child mental health 100%.
Okay, okay. I have some doubts. For example, I think that depression is a mental health category, very complex.
Mm-hmm.
No, can we really identify as depression the states of sadness, discouragement caused by social isolation or uncertainty?
Could you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
Uh, can we really identify a depression state? See, the
Hmm.
states of sadness and discouragement caused by social isolation or uncertainty.
Hmm.
It is it is the same when we see the people suffering sadness, for example. We can uh, we can conclude that it is depression, or it is more complex, the problem, the depression problems.
I'd say that's a really good question. Let me think. I would say that, depression is about how it impacts your daily functioning, right? So, the depression is I mean, it's about the feelings of sadness. It's about, not wanting to go out with your friends. It's about changing your sleep, changing your weight. But it's really about how those things impact your daily functioning, right? And impact your ability to work, right? To do your work, to be a parent to your kids, to be a good partner, to be a good child to your friend, to be a good friend, all those things. So I think in that sense, it's still a valid thing to look at. I'd say it's complicated to look at in the context of this whole pandemic because we're all experiencing this major stressor, right? That's really impacting us. But generally, as long as these levels of sadness, and changes in sleep, changes in weight, all, the different cluster of things that are in fact depression impact your life, then I think it fits the criteria. If that answers your question.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Hmm.
I have another question here in the chat.
Hmm.
I'm going to read it. Uh, it says, Valentina Ruiz says, thanks for sharing this important research. They are so innovative. Well, I don't have any question, but when I was listening them, it just come up into my mind that it would be so interesting to make some research with the sons of the sample of parents to know the effects of the mental health of the parents to the child, like in the depressive symptoms, could or not affect them. It's asking if see if the depressive symptoms could or do not affect them. Have you ever thought about that?
So that's not my area necessarily, but there's a lot of research showing that, parental mental health absolutely impacts kids, right? And there's, once again, lots of different factors that play a role in that, so even the way mothers impact their daughters is different than the way mothers will impact their sons, and same for fathers and sons and fathers and daughters, right? It's all these complicated relationships, but in general, still parental depression is associated with, with kids. We don't say that kids have depression. We say that kids maybe are showing internalizing and externalizing symptoms. But there's a lot of research showing that, when parents are depressed, kids, as they get older, will show more um, internalizing and externalizing symptoms, which are related to depression.
Okay. Another question says, what about children raised only by parents?
What do you mean?
Um, says, um,
Raised only by single parents?
yes, single parents.
Oh, raised
Yes,
only by single parents.
it is relevant for the for
Mhm.
depression or any risk factors.
Absolutely. Being a single parent is extremely difficult. Like I said, I have these two kids, and they run me and my wife crazy. Like I have no energy all the time. Um, So, I mean, being a single parent is very, very stressful because you have to manage all of these roles by yourself, right? And there is research showing that single parents, usually single mothers, because the vast majority of single parents are single mothers, you know, their health is impacted by the levels of stress that they have to take on for themselves and for their kids, and the societal perceptions of what a single parent is, right? Like people have negative perceptions of what single parents are, and that also affects them, I
Yeah,
think. Yeah.
yeah, I see, I see.
I
Thank you.
see Diane asked a question.
Yes, I have another one. Hi, Dice. I wanted to know if you could give us some general examples about some social policies that could be made in order to improve parents' mental health, especially with minorities and low-income families.
Thank you. That's a great question. So I'd say for me, the number one thing would be, I think, paid paternity leave. So I think it's important that after kids are born, I mean, paid parental leave, period. So I think, you know, after kids are born, it's important that moms have a space to recover from, you know, physically giving birth to a child, if they are if they did give birth to a child. So that's important that they do that. And fathers need time to be able to focus on their kids and support the moms, right? So first and foremost is paid parental leave. After everybody has a kid, they should be able to go home for X amount of months to be able to effectively parent their infant. So I think that's first. Second, you know, in the United States, there's this program called WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, and it's a federal program. It's a really important program, and I personally benefited from it with my own child, that provided milk, cheese, vegetables, fruits, and other types of groceries to low income families, right? But though these are typically reserved for moms. It's literally called WIC, women, infants, and children. Men are typically not included unless they're a single parent. And often women are not able to get it if they are in a relationship with if they are married to a man, right? If they're married to somebody. So I think these types of programs need to be broadened out to be able to support families just generally, right? I think a lot of the mental health issues that we see are actually just structural issues related to socioeconomic status, right? And making sure that people have their basic needs met. Do I have my groceries met? Do I have my groceries? Do I have my rent or my mortgage? You know, that's what's most important, I think, and that will help families.
Okay, thank you. I have another questions concerning COVID.
Mm-hmm.
What is your opinion concerning parent stress or anxiety problems due to their work with their children during virtual education at homes? I think it is a growing problem, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody knows how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. You know, you know, for man, you know, COVID-19 has just changed everything, right? You know, it's changed the world. You know, we had life before it, and we're gonna have life after. So, you know, absolutely. I mean, parents are just part, and there's once again, I want to stress this, that it's particularly mothers, particularly low income mothers, particularly low income Black and Latino mothers who are really, really, really suffering right now in this COVID-19 pandemic. And you know, back to your the previous question about single parents, right? You know, that just makes all this so much more difficult. You know, it just makes this whole experience so much harder, right? So for parents with school age children, it's difficult, right? That like they at the end of the day they're stressed because, you know, usually they get up, they drop their kids off at school, and they'd go about their business, and that was hard enough. But now my kids at home, depending on the age, you have to be over there every second trying to help them fix that. Oh, the Zoom room closed, gotta go back to fix the Zoom, gotta do this, gotta do that. And absolutely that's impacted mental. I haven't personally done any research on it, but I would bet that, you know, once if we test that, we'd see that the parents who are more stressed about things related to their children's schooling, people who are more anxious about their children's schooling, will show worse mental health symptoms. I'm sure of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Hide. Um, well, we have to thank you again for your participations in these webinars, and it was very, very interesting, your point of view, your research, and I hope that this will be not the last time we are going to talk about these problems. It's important, the anxiety, stress, and as a causes of depression symptoms in the family, and I think it is a very, very interesting place we have to work with.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, and in the next week we're going to be with another presentations from the University of California, and now we're very pleased to have you here. And I don't know if Guido, do you have something to say about that? Something to add?
Yes, if it's okay, I'll say it in English and Spanish.
Okay.
Muchas gracias a todos por participar hoy. Estamos bien alegres que el doctor Bamishigbin podía compartir su trabajo con ustedes hoy día. Todos los trabajos que él ha presentado han sido aquí bien publicados, y hasta en la televisión CNN está demostrando su trabajo importante con los padres. Entonces, ojalá hay alguna ideas de cómo podemos implementar algunas de estas metodologías en Bolivia también. La próxima semana tenemos a la doctora Miller, que también va a compartir sus metodologías electrofisiológicos, que creo que muchos de ustedes estaban interesados a la semana pasada, y espero que estos temas les interesa. Muchas gracias.
Claro que sí.